I hadn't thought about him in years. Not since I was 9. Not since my mother told me that imaginary friends were just a phase, something kids invented when they were lonely. I believed her. Or at least, I thought I did. I grew up, went to college, found work, and built a life far away from the small house where I used to whisper to someone who wasn't there. But last night, just after midnight, I woke to the sound of knuckles rapping against my front door. 3 deliberate knocks. The kind that make your chest tighten before your brain even catches up. I froze in bed, straining to listen. My neighborhood is quiet, too quiet at night. No one knocks at midnight. Nobody should be there. Then came the voice, soft, familiar, calling my name through the door, the way you call to an old friend you're happy to see again. Ryan. I hadn't heard that voice since I was a child. I knew it instantly. It was him, the imaginary friend I'd buried under decades of disbelief. The one I called Marlo. I don't know why I named him that. The word just came to me when I was little. My mom laughed when I told her, said it sounded too grown up for a kid to come up with. But Marlo had stuck, and now Marlo was at my door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body felt pinned to the mattress. Because here's the thing. When I was a kid, Marlo wasn't some harmless pretend companion. He was wrong. Too tall for an imaginary kid. Too quiet between sentences, too real. I told myself I'd invented him. I told myself none of it had ever happened. Until last night, the knocking came again. Louder this time. Ryan, I know you're awake. The air felt electric. Thick with pressure, like before a storm. I forced myself out of bed. Every nerve screaming not to. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep by the closet, padded barefoot down the hall, and stopped at the door. The peephole showed nothing, just darkness. My hand hovered over the lock. I couldn't open it. I knew if I did, something would be waiting. But the problem was, I didn't know if leaving it closed was any safer. Because Marlo never needed an open door when I was a kid. When I was 7, I woke one night to find him crouched at the foot of my bed, too long-limbed to be human, with fingers that curled like twigs. He whispered my name until I looked at him, then grinned with a mouth too wide. That memory hit me all at once, a fist in my gut. My knees buckled, and I nearly dropped the bat. "Come on, Ryan," Marlo whispered through the wood. "You don't have to pretend anymore." The words tore something open in me, because I had been pretending. Pretending he wasn't real. Pretending I hadn't spent half my childhood doing things I didn't understand just because he told me to. Digging holes in the woods. Locking doors my mother swore she hadn't locked. Leaving little piles of food in the basement for guests I never saw. I buried it all under years of normal life. Until he came back to remind me. I stumbled backward, shaking, clutching the bat to my chest. I don't remember deciding to speak, but my mouth opened anyway. "What do you want?" Silence. Then, low and playful. "You." The house felt smaller suddenly, the shadow sharper. I sprinted back to my room, slammed the door, and wedged a chair under the knob. I stayed up until dawn, listening to every creak, every sigh of the house, waiting for him to force his way in. He never did. At 6:30, sunlight spilled through the blinds. For the first time in hours, I let myself breathe. I told myself it was a dream, sleep paralysis, a hallucination dredged up by stress. But when I went downstairs, there were muddy footprints on the porch, bare long-toed, too large to be mine, and next to them, scratched into the wood in crooked letters, "Welcome back." I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't. I called in sick and sat on the couch with all the lights on, gripping my phone like a lifeline. Every noise outside made me flinch. By afternoon, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe a raccoon had left the footprints. Maybe some neighborhood kid had scratched the words into the porch. Easy explanations, logical ones. But logic doesn't stop your skin from crawling. I tried to call my mom, desperate for some piece of childhood memory I might have misremembered, but she didn't answer, just her voicemail telling me she'd call back. So I sat and waited, and when night fell, I felt it to wait him outside. I didn't hear knocking this time, just silence, heavy and suffocating, as though the house itself was holding its breath. At 12:17, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The text was short. Open the door. My chest seized. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the coffee table. Another text came through. I miss you. I wanted to run. But where? If Marlowe had followed me across decades, if he could knock on my door after 20 years, he could follow me anywhere. The third message made by a rise in my throat. You never finished the holes. I nearly smashed the phone against the wall. When I was a kid, Marlowe made me dig. Not big holes, just little ones in the woods behind our house. He said we were preparing. Preparing for what? He never explained. I remember blisters on my palms, dirt under my nails, my mother yelling at me for ruining my clothes. But I dug anyway, because when I didn't, Marlowe would sulk, his grin turning into something sharper. I thought those memories were nightmares. Now, he was reminding me they weren't. The phone buzzed again, but I couldn't look. Instead, I bolted for the bedroom, shoved the dresser in front of the door, and curled under blankets like a child hiding from the dark. Somewhere outside, laughter rose, low at first, then higher, bending and cracking until it no longer sounded human. I must have blacked out at some point, because when I opened my eyes, sunlight burned through the blinds again. The texts were gone, every single one. No unknown number in my history. Nothing, but the porch told the truth. The footprints were deeper now, pressed hard into the wood, leading to the door, leading away, and in the dirt by the steps, a shallow hole waited, freshly dug. By the third night, I was unraveling. I couldn't eat, couldn't think. All I could do was wait for him. He didn't knock this time. He let himself in. I woke at 3:03 a.m. to the sound of my front door opening. Not kicked, not forced, just a clean click of a lock turning. I froze, every muscle burning with terror. I hadn't locked the door. That realization hit like ice water. I hadn't locked it because deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Soft footsteps creaked across the floorboards. Too heavy for a child, too deliberate for a burglar. They stopped outside my bedroom. Ryan, the voice whispered through the door, let me in. The doorknob rattled. The dresser groaned against the frame. And then, impossibly, the voice shifted. Higher, warmer. My mother's voice. Sweetheart, it's me. Please let me in. Tears burned my eyes. I knew it wasn't her. I knew my mom lived 3 states away. But hearing her voice, gentle and pleading, was worse than hearing Marlowe's own. The dresser scraped forward, inch by inch, as if unseen hands were pulling from the other side. I clamped my hands over my ears, whispering no, no, no. The movement stopped. Silence. Then, from the corner of the room, directly behind me, you can't ignore me forever. I spun, swinging the baseball bat blindly. It connected with nothing but air. The room was empty, but on the wall above my bed, in fresh dirt-colored smears, were the words, finish the holes. I didn't last much longer. 2 days later, my mom called back. She said she'd had a dream about me, about the house, about digging in the backyard. She said she woke up crying, but didn't know why. I told her everything. The knocks, the footprints, the texts. I expected her to laugh, to tell me I needed sleep, but she went quiet. Ryan, she said finally, when you were little, I used to hear you talking in your room at night. I thought it was normal. Kids and their imaginary friends. But sometimes, I'd stand outside your door and listen. You weren't talking like a kid. You were obeying, answering questions. Her breath caught. And once, I swear to God, I heard a second voice. I don't remember the drive back to my childhood home. Just the desperate, gnawing certainty that I had to go. That if I didn't, Marlowe would never stop. The woods were smaller than I remembered, choked with weeds and fallen branches. But I found them, the shallow depressions in the earth, almost gone after decades, but still there. 6 holes, unfinished. The shovel was waiting for me, leaning against the old shed like someone had placed it there just for me. I told myself not to touch it. I told myself this was how he won. But as the sun dipped below the trees, I felt into my back, grinning, whispering in my ear, "Good boy, let's finish what we started." The last thing I remember is pressing the shovel into the dirt, the ground strangely soft, almost welcoming. Now I'm home again. My hands ache, my fingernails are broken, and there's mud in my sheets. And tonight, when the knocking starts again, I know I'll answer. Because Marlowe isn't imaginary. He's patient. And he's hungry. Story 2, the drawing game. I was cleaning out the attic when I found the box. Dusty, crushed at the corners, buried under old blankets. My handwriting scrawled across the top. "Keep out." I laughed at first. It had to be from when I was a kid, probably full of toys or junk I'd stashed away. But when I pulled it open, my stomach turned. It wasn't toys. It was drawings. Hundreds of them. Crayon sketches on yellowing paper. The kind teachers used to hand out in grade school. Each one showed the same thing. A tall, thin figure with stick-like arms and a crooked smile. Sometimes standing beside me. Sometimes holding my hand. Sometimes crouched by my bed. I knew instantly what it was. My imaginary friend. I hadn't thought about him in years. Maybe decades. My mom used to say all kids have one, that it's just part growing up. I believed her until I saw those drawings. Until I realized how many hours of my childhood I must have spent scribbling that same figure. On the back of one, in shaky letters, I'd written his name, Callum. I don't know how the name came to me back then. I just remember whispering it into the dark, waiting for him to whisper back. And now here I was, 30 years old, staring at proof that Callum hadn't just been a passing phase. He had consumed me. That night, I dreamed of him. The attic was dark, the air thick with dust. Callum crouched in the corner, his long arms hugging his knees, his crooked grin stretching too wide. "You remembered me," he whispered. I jolted awake, sweating, heart hammering. Just a dream, I told myself. Just a dream stirred up by finding the drawings. But the next morning, a fresh sheet of paper lay on my kitchen table. Not mine. The lines were too sharp, the grin too familiar. Callum, drawn in crayon. I burned the paper in the sink. The flames curled to black, the grin disappearing in smoke. But the next day, another drawing appeared. This one taped to my bathroom mirror. The grin was wider. I tore it down and ripped it into shreds. The day after, there were 3 drawings. One on my nightstand, one on the inside of my front door, one on the windshield of my car. All of them the same. Tall, thin, smiling, and on the back of each, "Play with me." By the 4th day, I was unraveling. I stopped sleeping, stopped leaving the house. I called my mom, desperate for answers. "Do you remember my imaginary friend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. Then, "Of course, you used to talk about him all the time." Did I ever say his name? Her voice softened. "Yes, Callum." "Why?" I nearly dropped the phone. "I didn't tell you that." I whispered. She hesitated. "Honey, you did. You used to scream it at night, over and over, like he was in a room with you." Sometimes I thought I heard him answer. The line went quiet. Then, faintly, I heard it. A second voice, whispering, "Play with me." That night, the drawings escalated. I woke to the sound of paper rustling. My bedroom floor was covered in them, scattered like fallen leaves. Each one showed the same thing. Me, sleeping in my bed, and beside me, a tall, grinning figure. The final drawing wasn't me asleep. It was me awake, sitting up, staring at the paper in horror. And behind me, in the picture, Callum loomed. I dropped it hard in my throat and spun around. The room was empty, but the air smelled faintly of wax. Crayon. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a box of old drawings, the new ones, every scrap of paper I could find, and drove them out to a field miles away. I lit them on fire, watching until the last ember died. For the first time in days, I felt free. That night, I slept soundly. No drawings, no whispers, until the knocking started. Soft at first, then louder, 3 deliberate raps against the front door. I crept down the hall, stomach twisting, and taped to the door was a single fresh drawing, not of Callum, of me, standing in the hallway, holding this paper. Behind me, the door in the picture was slightly open, and in the crack, his crooked smile gleamed. I tore the drawing from the door and crumpled it into my fist, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. My eyes darted to the peephole. Nothing but darkness. But the paper in my hand, it was warm, as if it had just been drawn. I dropped it like it burned me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching the baseball bat I hadn't touched since college. Every creak, every groan of the house made me flinch. At 2:46 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification. New photo from my camera roll. My blood went cold. It was me, sitting on the couch, clutching the bat, staring at my phone. Taken from the hallway, I launched out of my chair and tore through the house, flipping lights, opening closets, checking every corner. Empty. Nothing. When I came back, another new photo waited. This time it was closer, taken from right behind me. The bat slipped from my hands. I didn't even hear it hit the floor. On the photo, just at the edge of the frame, a hand rested on my shoulder. Thin, too long. I smashed the phone against the floor until the screen cracked and went black. Then I ran. I drove to my mom's house. She hadn't seen me in months, and when she opened the door, her face crumpled. "You look awful," she whispered. I shoved past her into the living room. "Mom, tell me everything. About Callum. Everything you remember." She hesitated, but the look in my eyes must have convinced her. She sat me down and spoke in a voice that trembled more with every word. "You used to sit in your room for hours, whispering. At first, I thought it was harmless. Kids talk to themselves, right? But then you started bringing him plates of food. You'd slide them under your bed. When I asked why, you said Callum didn't like eating in front of people. I felt sick. One night, I woke up to footsteps in the hallway. I thought it was you, but when I checked your room, you were sound asleep. The food plate was gone. And I swear, Ryan, I swear I saw someone crouched by your bed. Long arms, watching you." She shuddered. That's when I called a priest. He came, he prayed, and after that, you stopped talking about Callum. I thought it was over. But you, she stopped, choking on the words. "Ryan, why is he back now?" I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. But the smell hit me then, faint, waxy chemical. Crayon. It was in her house too. I left before nightfall. Back at my apartment, I tried to hold myself together. I bought a brand new phone. I locked every window, every door, but Callum doesn't need locks. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of paper sliding across the floor. Dozens of sheets. When I turned on the light, the floor was covered in new drawings. All fresh, all in color. Not just me this time. Of my mom, her sitting on the couch, her cooking dinner, her asleep in bed. The last drawing made me gag. It showed her lie on the floor, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream. And above her, Callum loomed, grinning, one long finger pressed his lips. I swept the drawings into trash bags and hauled them out to the dumpster. But when I came back inside, the last picture was waiting on the table, still warm. I called her the next morning. No answer. Panic clawed at me. I jumped in the car and drove straight to her place. The house was silent, the blinds drawn, the front door was unlocked. "Mom!" My voice cracked as I pushed inside. The living room was empty, the kitchen too. And then I saw it, a sheet of paper on the floor in the hallway, a fresh drawing of me standing in that hallway, looking down at this exact drawing. I spun, bat raised, heart hammering. Nothing but silence. I ran from room to room until I found her. She was in bed, alive, asleep, but taped to her forehead was another drawing, her eyes drawn wide, her mouth stretched open in terror. I ripped it off and shook her awake. She blinked at me, confused, terrified. "What's happening?" she cried. I couldn't answer, because behind her, Scratched into the headboard with something sharp were 2 words: play forever. We left that night, packed what we could, drove across state lines, checked into a motel under a fake name. I thought distance would save us, but Callum doesn't care about distance. On the bedspread of the motel, waiting when I pulled back the covers, was a fresh crayon drawing of the motel itself. Our window lit up, and in the window, a tall figure grinned. I don't know how long I can keep running. The drawings follow me everywhere. They show up in my car, in my bags, even slipped into my jacket pocket. I don't sleep anymore. I can't, because every time I close my eyes, I hear the soft drag of crayon on paper. And when I open them, there's always a new drawing waiting. The last one was of a door, my door, and from the other side of it, a long hand was knocking. Story 3, the hollow voice. When my son first mentioned his new friend, I laughed it off. Kids invent playmates all the time. But then he said the name, Callum, and my blood went cold. I hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. Not since I was a kid myself. Not since I whispered it into the dark, waiting for someone to whisper back. Where did you hear that name? I asked, trying to sound calm. My son shrugged. He was 6, perched cross-legged on his bed, fiddling with a toy car. He told me. Who told you? My friend, Callum. He says he used to play with you too. The car slipped from my hands. For days I tried to ignore it, pretend it was just a coincidence. But the signs piled up. I'd catch my son talking to someone in his room at night, pausing as if listening, then nodding and answering. I heard faint footsteps in the hallway long after he was asleep. Too heavy for him, too soft for me. And once, when I checked on him at 3 a.m., he was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, staring into the corner. He doesn't like when you watch, my son whispered. The corner was empty. At least it looked empty. I tried asking him more about Callum, hoping to catch him in a slip. What does he look like? I asked over breakfast. He grinned through a mouthful of cereal. He's tall, really tall. He bends down so he doesn't hit the ceiling. My hands shook as I buttered his toast. And what does he say to you? Mostly he tells me games we can play. But last night, my son lowered his voice. He told me a secret. I froze. What kind of secret? That he used to live in your room before you got big. That night, I dreamed of my old bedroom, the wallpaper peeling, the bed pushed against the wall, the closet door cracked open, and from the crack, long fingers curling out, a voice whispering, "Play with me." I woke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, the memory too vivid to be just a dream. When I checked on my son, he was sound asleep, but something made me glance at his toy box. Wedged between the trucks and action figures was a crumpled sheet of paper, a drawing, done in thick crayon, a tall, thin figure, grinning, and beside him my son, holding his hand. I tried to convince myself it was just imagination. Kids draw monsters all the time, right? But the next day, another drawing appeared, this time on the fridge, held by a magnet. I hadn't put it there. This one showed our house. And in every single window, Callum's grin. Things escalated fast after that. My son started refusing to eat at the table. Callum doesn't like when we eat in front of him, he said. He wouldn't sleep with the lights off. He said Callum was too bright in the dark, that it hurt his eyes. And then one night, I heard 2 voices in his room. Not just his. One deep, hollow, scraping like wind through a tunnel. Play forever. I threw open the door, hard in my throat. My son was alone, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Who were you talking to?" I demanded. He looked up at me, eyes wide, like I just asked the dumbest question in the world. "Callum." The breaking point came 3 nights later. I woke to soft knocking. Not on the front door, not on the walls, on my bedroom door. 3 deliberate raps. I sat up, frozen, staring at the door. From the other side, my son's voice. "Daddy, he wants to see you." But it wasn't right. The pitch was wrong. Hollow, empty. I opened the door anyway. My son stood there in his pajamas, but his lips weren't moving. The voice that came from him wasn't his. "Hello, old friend." I slammed the door shut so hard the frame rattled. My son's small fist pounded against it from the other side. "Daddy, let me in. Daddy, please." But the voice wasn't his. Too deep, too hollow. It vibrated through the wood, scraping into my bones. I pressed my back against the door, whispering, "You're not him. You're not him." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, soft as a breath, "He's mine now." The next morning, my son acted normal. He ate cereal, watched cartoons, laughed like nothing had happened. But when I asked if he remembered the night before, his smile faltered. "He doesn't like when you talk about him," he whispered. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to drag him out of the house and never come back. Instead, I said nothing. Fear kept me still. That night, I moved a chair against my bedroom door. I sat awake, baseball bat in hand, listening for footsteps. At 3:07 a.m., the air turned icy. My breath fogged in the dark. And then I heard it, my son's voice right outside the door. "Daddy, I drew something for you." Paper slid under the crack. My hand shook as I picked it up. A crayon drawing of me, sleeping in bed, and looming over me, Callum's grin. I dropped it, heart hammering. When I looked back, the paper was gone. The next day, I took my son to stay with my sister. I lied, said work was overwhelming and I needed a break. She welcomed him with open arms. But that night, my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Is this some kind of joke?" Attached was a photo. My son, asleep on her couch. And behind him, in the dark of the hallway, a figure too tall, too thin, crouched low, grinning. I called her instantly. She picked up, whispering frantically, "I thought you were messing with me." I heard him talking in his sleep, saying that name, Callum, and then I saw something in the hall. "It's gone now, but..." Her voice broke. "Come get him. Now." I didn't argue. I drove through the night, heart pounding, eyes darting to the mirrors. Every shadow felt wrong. When I arrived, my sister was pale, shaking, clutching my son in her arms. "He can't stay here," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it followed him." I nodded. I already knew, because when I glanced down at my son's arm, I saw faint red marks. Thin, finger-like bruises. Too long, too tight. Back home, I tried everything. Salt across the doors. Prayers whispered until my throat went raw. I even called the same church my mom had years ago, begging them to send someone. They came. They prayed. They blessed the house. And for one night, it was quiet. No footsteps. No whispers. But at 3 a.m., I woke to laughter. My son's laughter. High-pitched, innocent. I stumbled down the hall, flung open his door. He sat on the floor, crayons scattered around him, dozens of fresh drawings taped to the walls, all of them of me, sleeping, screaming, running, and in every one, Callum's hand was wrapped around mine. I tore the papers down, shouting, begging my son to stop, but he just looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I can't stop, Daddy." He tells me what to draw. He says if I don't, he'll hurt you. My throat closed. "He doesn't want me anymore," my son whispered. "He wants you back." That night, I dreamed again. My childhood bedroom. The closet door wide open. Callum crouched inside, arms too long, grin too wide. "You left me," he hissed. His voice was hollow, rattling wrong. "But you came back. You always come back." I woke to the sound of my son screaming. I ran to his room and froze. He was standing in the corner, eyes shut tight, body trembling. His mouth moved, whispering. But the words weren't his. They were mine. The exact words I whispered as a child. "Callum, please don't hurt me. I can't protect him. I see that now. Callum doesn't want my son. My son is just a doorway. He wants me." And tonight, I heard it again. The knock, slow, deliberate, on my front door. When I pressed my ear to the wood, a voice rasped from the other side. "Play with me?" And then softer, closer, as if it were already inside. "Forever.